10 years ago, my sister stole my fiancé 1 month before our wedding. Last week at our mother's funeral, she couldn't believe who I was married to. You see, my husband just happens to own the company where her precious stolen fiancé now works. But here's the thing. I had no idea, so how did the universe serve up the most perfect revenge without me even trying? This is that story. You know that moment when you think you've moved on from something, and then life throws it right back in your face? Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me last Tuesday. My name is Jenna Walters, and I'm 37 years old. I run a pretty successful PR agency here in Chicago. We represent some big names, the kind of clients that make my competitors gnash their teeth. But none of that success, none of those late nights building my empire from scratch could have prepared me for what went down at my mother's funeral. See, 10 years ago, my younger sister Claire did something that completely shattered my world. She stole my fiancé, not metaphorically. I mean, she literally seduced him, slept with him, and convinced him to leave me exactly 1 month before our wedding. 1 month. I had already sent out invitations. The flowers were ordered. My dress was hanging in the closet, still wrapped in plastic. But we'll get to that nightmare later. Right now, I need to tell you about the funeral because that's where everything came full circle in the most unexpected way. I hadn't spoken to Claire in almost a decade. Our mother had tried to play peacemaker for a while, but eventually even she gave up. When Mom died suddenly of a heart attack 3 weeks ago, I knew I'd have to see Claire again. I dreaded it. My stomach was in knots for days leading up to the service. I walked into that funeral home in my hometown of Grand Rapids, Michigan, wearing my best black suit and my game face. The place smelled like lilies and old wood polish, exactly how I remembered, from when we buried my grandmother years ago. There were maybe 50 people there. Mom hadn't kept many close friends in her later years. And then I saw her. Claire. She looked different. Older, obviously, but there was something else. Her blonde hair was still perfect, her makeup flawless, but there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was wearing this expensive-looking black dress that probably cost more than most people's rent, but somehow it looked like she was trying too hard. She spotted me immediately and made a beeline across the room. I braced myself. "Jenna," she said, giving me one of those fake air kisses. You look exactly the same." There was something in her tone, something that made my skin crawl. "Hello, Claire," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I'm sorry for your loss." She laughed. Actually laughed. At a funeral. "Our loss, you mean, she was your mother too." Then she looked around dramatically. "So, are you here alone? I mean, I figured you would be, but I thought maybe you'd bring a friend or something." I could feel the familiar knot forming in my stomach. This was classic Claire, the subtle dig disguised as innocent concern. She was fishing, trying to figure out if I was still the broken, abandoned woman she'd left behind a decade ago. "Actually," she continued, lowering her voice like she was sharing some great secret, "I was just telling Zach how worried I've been about you. All these years, and you never found anyone else, did you? I mean, you're 37 now, and I know how hard it gets for women our age." She trailed off with this pitying look that made me want to scream. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. "Oh, Claire," I said, "there's actually someone I'd like you to meet." I turned toward the entrance, where I could see a tall figure in a perfectly tailored black suit walking through the door. My heart did this little flutter thing it always does when I see him. "Nathan," I called out, waving him over. He smiled when he saw me, that warm, genuine smile that had made me fall in love with him 3 years ago. As he walked toward us, I could see Claire's expression starting to change. Her eyes went wide, then narrowed like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Nathan reached us and immediately put his arm around my waist, pulling me close. "Sorry I'm late, sweetheart," he said, kissing my temple. The meeting ran long. "Claire," I said, enjoying every second of this moment, "I'd like you to meet my husband, Nathan Reeve." Nathan extended his hand with that easy confidence of his. Claire, right? Jenna's told me so much about you. I'm sorry for your loss. I watched Claire's face cycle through about 6 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition shock, and then something that looked like panic. Nathan Reeve, she repeated slowly, like she was testing how the words felt in her mouth. As in, Reeve Biotechnology? Nathan nodded modestly. That's right. Do we know each other? Claire's face had gone completely pale. She looked at me, then back at Nathan, then at me again. Her mouth was actually hanging open. She stammered. You're married 3 years next month. I said, unable to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. We had a beautiful ceremony in Napa. Small, intimate, just close friends and family. The irony wasn't lost on me, or on her. She hadn't been invited, obviously. She wasn't close anything to me anymore. Claire's eyes were darting around like she was looking for an escape route. But you never... Mom never said... Mom and I didn't talk much about my personal life, I said simply. Which was true. After Claire's betrayal, I'd kept my mother at arm's length. Some wounds cut too deep. Nathan, bless him, seemed to sense the tension, but didn't push. He just squeezed my hand and said, I'm going to pay my respects to your mother. Take your time. As he walked away, Claire grabbed my arm. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into my skin. Jenna, she whispered urgently, you have to know that Nathan Reeve is... his company just... She stopped herself, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. Whatever she was thinking, it was big. What about his company, Claire? I asked innocently. Before she could answer, I heard a familiar voice behind me. Jenna, is that really you? I turned around, and there he was. Zach, the man who was supposed to be my husband, the man who had promised to love me forever and then threw it all away for my sister. He looked terrible. Really terrible. His hair was thinning, he'd put on at least 30 pounds, and there were bags under his eyes that made him look like he hadn't slept in months. But it was more than that. He looked defeated. Hello, Zach, I said calmly. His eyes immediately went to my left hand where my wedding ring caught the light. A beautiful 2-carat diamond that Nathan had designed himself. You're married, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. Yes, I am, very happily. I looked between him and Claire. How are you two doing? The silence that followed was deafening. Claire and Zach exchanged a look that told me everything I needed to know. Whatever fairy tale they'd built on the ruins of my life, it wasn't going so well. We're fine, Claire said quickly, but her voice was shaky. Great, I said. Well, I should go find Nathan. The service is starting soon. As I walked away, I could hear Claire hissing something at Zach, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to. The look on their faces had told me everything. You see, what Claire didn't know, what she was probably just now realizing, was that Nathan's company, Reeve Biotechnology, had recently acquired a failing startup, a little company that specialized in agricultural software. Zach's company. My husband now owned the company where my ex-fiancé worked. The same ex-fiancé who had left me for my sister was now basically an employee of the man I'd married. Life has a funny way of coming full circle, doesn't it? But this is just the beginning of the story. To understand how we got here, I need to take you back to where it all started. Back to my childhood when I first learned that in the Walters family, Claire always got what she wanted, and I always let her take it. You know, standing there at that funeral watching Claire's world crumble in real time, I couldn't help but think about how we got to this point. Because this wasn't the first time Claire had taken something that was mine. Hell, it wasn't even the 10th time. See, Claire and I have been playing this twisted game our entire lives, except I didn't realize it was a game until it was way too late. Growing up in the Walters household was like living in a constant beauty pageant where I never quite made it past the talent portion. Claire is 2 years younger than me, but from the moment she could walk, she was the golden child. And I mean that literally. She had these gorgeous blonde ringlets and these huge blue eyes that made every adult in a 50-mile radius lose their minds. Oh my goodness, she's going to be a model someday. They'd coo lifting Claire up and spinning her around while I stood there holding whatever book I'd been reading. And don't get me wrong, my parents loved me, but they loved me for different reasons. I was the smart one, the responsible one, the one who got straight A's and won science fairs and could be trusted to babysit Claire when they went out for date nights. Jenna's going to be successful, Mom would tell her friends at church. She's got such a good head on her shoulders. She'll probably be a doctor or a lawyer or something important. And then she'd look at Claire, and her voice would get all soft and dreamy. But Claire's going to break hearts. Look at that face. She won't have to worry about a career. Some lucky man is going to snatch her up and take care of her forever. Even at 8 years old, I knew there was something wrong with that logic. But I kept my mouth shut and focused on my homework because that's what good big sisters do, right? The pattern started early. When Claire was 5 and I was 7, I had this stuffed elephant named Peanut that I absolutely adored. I'd had him since I was 3, and he went everywhere with me. One day, Claire decided she wanted Peanut. Not to play with, she had plenty of her own toys. But to have, to own. She threw the mother of all tantrums. I'm talking about the kind of meltdown that could probably be heard from space. She screamed and kicked and threw herself on the floor like she was having some kind of medical emergency. My parents were exhausted. Dad had been working double shifts at the plant, and Mom was dealing with her own mother's declining health. So when Claire pointed at Peanut and sobbed that she needed him, guess what happened? "Jenna, honey," Mom said, rubbing her temples, "you're getting too old for stuffed animals anyway. Why don't you let Claire have Peanut? You can pick out something else." Something else. Like Peanut was just some random toy and not the comfort object that had gotten me through my parents' fights, my grandfather's death, and the time I broke my arm falling off my bike. But I handed him over. Because that's what big sisters do, right? They sacrifice for the little ones. Claire clutched Peanut to her chest and gave me this smile. Not a grateful smile, not even a happy smile. It was triumphant, like she'd won something important. She lost interest in Peanut within a week. I found him stuffed in the back of her closet, covered in dust and missing one eye. When I asked if I could have him back, she said no. She didn't want him, but she didn't want me to have him either. That became our pattern. Claire would want something of mine. She'd make a scene. My parents would ask me to be the bigger person, and I'd give in. My clothes, my books, my friends, nothing was off limits. The worst part, I kept thinking that if I just gave her enough, if I was just generous enough, she'd be satisfied. She'd appreciate me. Maybe she'd even love me the way I loved her. When I was 12, I started keeping a diary. It was this beautiful leather-bound journal with a little lock that my aunt had given me for my birthday. I wrote everything in there. My fears, my dreams, my crush on Tommy Martinez from my math class. It was my private space, the one place where I could be completely honest about my feelings. Claire was 10, and she was going through what my mother generously called a difficult phase, which really meant she was a holy terror who seemed to delight in making everyone around her miserable. One day, I came home from school to find Claire in my room reading my diary out loud to her 2 best friends. They were all giggling and pointing at the page where I'd written about how much I liked Tommy and how I hoped he'd ask me to the spring dance. "Listen to this," Claire was saying, putting on this exaggerated voice that was supposed to sound like me. "Dear Diary, I think Tommy Martinez is the most handsome boy in the whole school. Today he said hi to me in the hallway and I almost fainted." Her friends erupted in laughter. I stood in the doorway, feeling like someone had just punched me in the stomach. "Give that back," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Claire looked up at me with this innocent expression. "Oh, hi, Jenna. We were just reading your little stories. They're so cute and pathetic." I lunged for the diary, but Claire tossed it to one of her friends, who tossed it to the other. They played keep away while I scrambled around my own room trying to get my private thoughts back. When my parents came home, I was sobbing. I told them what happened, expecting them to punish Claire, to make her understand that what she'd done was wrong. Instead, my mother sighed and said, Jenna, you shouldn't leave your diary where Claire can find it. You know how curious she gets. Curious, like breaking into someone's private thoughts was just a personality quirk. And Claire, Mom continued, barely even looking at her. Next time, ask permission before you borrow your sister's things. Borrow. Like my diary was a sweater she could return when she was done with it. That night, I started hiding everything that mattered to me. I got really good at it over the years. But the diary incident wasn't the worst thing Claire did to me growing up. No, that honor belongs to what happened on prom night my senior year. I was 18, and I'd finally worked up the courage to talk to boys without turning red and stammering. There was this guy in my AP English class named David Chen. He was smart, funny, and he actually seemed interested in having real conversations with me. We'd been flirting for months. You know, that innocent high school flirting where you find excuses to work together on projects and sit next to each other at lunch. 2 weeks before prom, David asked me to go with him. I was over the moon. I'd never been asked to a dance before, and I had this fantasy that prom would be my Cinderella moment. I spent weeks shopping for the perfect dress with my mom, and we found this beautiful navy blue gown that made me feel elegant and sophisticated. Claire was a sophomore, so she wasn't old enough for prom yet, but she was obsessed with the whole thing. She kept asking to see my dress, to hear about my plans to meet David. I thought she was just being a supportive little sister for once. The night of prom, David picked me up in his dad's car. He looked so handsome in his tux, and when he saw me in my dress, his eyes went wide and he said, Jenna, you look absolutely stunning. I felt stunning. For the first time in my life, I felt like the beautiful sister. We had an amazing time at dinner, and the dance was everything I dreamed it would be. David was a surprisingly good dancer, and we spent the whole night talking and laughing and falling into that easy rhythm that happens when you really connect with someone. Around 11 o'clock, we decided to step outside for some fresh air. The gymnasium was stuffy and loud, and we wanted to have a real conversation without shouting over the music. We were sitting on a bench in the school's courtyard, and David was telling me about his plans for college, when I heard familiar laughter. I looked up, and there was Claire, standing by the parking lot with a group of kids I didn't recognize. They were all older, probably college age, and they were clearly drinking. Is that your sister? David asked, following my gaze. Before I could answer, Claire spotted us. She squealed and came running over, stumbling slightly in heels that were way too high for someone her age. Jenna, she called out. Oh my God, you look so pretty. And you must be David? She threw her arms around David before he could react, pressing herself against him in a way that made my stomach clench. She was wearing this tiny black dress that was completely inappropriate for a 16-year-old, and she reeked of beer and cheap perfume. Claire, I said sharply, what are you doing here and why are you drinking? She giggled and waved her hand dismissively. Oh, please, I'm just having fun. Don't be such a mom. She turned to David, batting her eyelashes. Jenna's always been such a worrier. I bet you're way more fun than she is. I watched in horror as she flirted shamelessly with my date. She complimented his tux, asked him to dance, even suggested that they ditch me and go hang out with her cool friends. The worst part, David seemed charmed by her. He laughed at her jokes, complimented her dress, and when she asked him to walk her to her friend's car so she could get her purse, he agreed. They were gone for 20 minutes. 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. When they came back, Claire's lip gloss was smudged and David wouldn't meet my eyes. Thanks for walking me, David, Claire said sweetly. You're such a gentleman. I can see why Jenna likes you so much. The rest of the night was ruined. David was distant and distracted, and when he dropped me off at home, he barely said goodbye. He mumbled something about having a good time and said he'd call me, but I knew he wouldn't. And he didn't. On Monday morning, I heard through the grapevine that David had asked Claire to be his date to his college's spring formal. Apparently, they'd really connected at prom. When I confronted Claire about it, she shrugged and said, I can't help it if he likes me better. Maybe you should try being more interesting. That was the moment I realized that Claire didn't just take my things because she wanted them. She took them because they were mine. My happiness was a challenge to her. My success was something that needed to be destroyed. But even after all of that, I still held out hope that we could have a real relationship. I told myself that she was young, that she'd grow out of it, that deep down, she really did love me. I was so naive. College was my escape. I went to Northwestern, and for the first time in my life, I was completely free from Claire's shadow. I could make friends without worrying that she'd steal them. I could date without looking over my shoulder. I could just be myself. And that's where I met Zach. It was my second year of grad school, and I was working on my master's in communications. I was in the library one night, completely buried in research for my thesis, when this guy at the next table leaned over and said, "Excuse me, but you look like you're about to have a nervous breakdown. Can I buy you a coffee?" I looked up, ready to tell this stranger to mind his own business, and found myself staring into the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen. "I'm Zach," he said, extending his hand, "and you look like someone who needs a study break." He was right. I'd been hunched over my laptop for 6 straight hours, surviving on vending machine snacks and pure determination. My neck was killing me. My eyes were burning, and I was pretty sure I hadn't had a coherent thought in the past hour. "I'm Jenna," I said, accepting his handshake. "And you're absolutely right about the nervous breakdown thing." Zach was everything I'd never allowed myself to hope for. He was pursuing his MBA with a focus on agricultural technology, and he had this passion for using business to solve real-world problems. He talked about wanting to help small farmers compete with big corporations, about using technology to make food production more sustainable and efficient. But more than that, he was genuinely interested in me. Not in what I could give him, or how I could make his life easier, but in who I was as a person. He asked about my dreams, my fears, my opinions on everything from politics to pizza toppings. He remembered details from conversations we'd had weeks earlier. He made me feel heard. We started studying together, then getting coffee together, then having dinner together. By Christmas break of that year, we were officially dating, and I was happier than I'd ever been in my life. Zach came from a small farming family in Iowa, and he had this easy confidence that I envied. He'd grown up knowing he was loved unconditionally, and it showed in everything he did. He was secure in himself in a way that I was still learning to be. "You know what I love about you, Jenna?" he told me one night as we walked through campus in the snow. "You are so genuinely good. You don't have any hidden agendas or games. What you see is what you get, and what I see is amazing." For 2.5 years, I lived in that bubble of happiness. Zach and I were partners in every sense of the word. We studied together, planned our futures together, and talked about everything. He knew about my difficult relationship with Claire, but he couldn't really understand it. How could he? He came from a family where siblings supported each other, where love wasn't a competition. "I'd love to meet her someday," he said more than once. "She can't be as bad as you make her sound. She's your sister." I always found excuses to avoid that meeting. Claire was busy with high school then, busy with her first year of college. We lived in different states. The timing was never right. Deep down, I knew I was protecting something precious. Zach was mine, really, truly mine, and I wasn't ready to share him with Claire's gravitational pull, but I couldn't protect him forever. The summer before our final year of grad school, Zach proposed. We were visiting his family's farm in Iowa, and he took me out to this old oak tree where he used to play as a kid. The sunset was painting the cornfields gold, and everything felt perfect and peaceful and right. "Jenna," he said, dropping to one knee right there in the dirt, "I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, a classic solitaire that caught the light and threw little rainbows across the grass. But more than that, it represented everything. I'd always wanted a real partnership, a love that was mine, and mine alone, a future that belonged to us. I said yes, obviously. How could I not? We decided to have a long engagement so we could finish school and get our careers started. We set the date for the following October, almost 18 months away. It felt like plenty of time to plan the perfect wedding. I should have known that Claire would find a way to ruin it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let me tell you about the moment I realized that all my careful planning, all my attempts to keep my life separate from Claire's, had been for nothing. Because Claire always gets what she wants. And once she met Zach, she wanted him too. I held onto that secret for almost 6 months. Zach and I were both so busy with our final year of grad school that we barely had time to breathe, let alone plan a wedding. But every night I'd look at my ring and feel this warm bubble of happiness. I was engaged. Someone had chosen me. Someone wanted to build a life with me. Actually, let me back up a second. I told you Zach proposed on his family's farm, but that's not the whole story. The real proposal, the one that changed everything, happened 3 months later on a hiking trip in Colorado. We'd gone there for spring break with a group of friends from school. It was one of those perfect March days where the snow was starting to melt, but the air still had that crisp, clean bite to it. Zach and I had hiked ahead of the group to this overlook that gave you a 360-degree view of the Rockies. "You know what I realized up here?" Zach said, pulling me close, as we stood on this rocky outcrop that felt like the top of the world. "That you're afraid of heights?" I joked because he'd been gripping my hand pretty tightly on the way up. He laughed and shook his head. "No, I realized that I want to spend the rest of my life seeing views like this with you. Not just the pretty ones, but all of them. The scary ones, the boring ones, the ones that make us both want to turn around and go home." He got down on one knee right there, 8,000 feet above sea level, and pulled out this gorgeous ring. Not the simple solitaire I'd told everyone about. This was something else entirely. A vintage Art Deco setting with a center diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the mountain light and threw it back like stars. "Jenna Michelle Walters," he said, and hearing my full name in his voice made me start crying before he even finished the question. "Will you marry me and let me love you for the rest of our lives?" I said yes through happy tears, and when he slipped that ring onto my finger, it felt like everything in my life had finally clicked into place. We took a selfie with the mountains behind us, both of us grinning like idiots, and I knew I'd remember that moment forever. When we got back to Chicago, I was walking on air. I called my parents immediately, and even my mother seemed genuinely excited for me. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful," she said. "I can't wait to meet him properly. When are you bringing him home?" That should have been my first warning sign. My mother never asked when I was coming home. "Soon," I promised. "Maybe for Easter dinner." Easter was still a month away, which felt like plenty of time to mentally prepare for introducing Zach to my family. I'd told him stories about Claire over the years, but I'd always downplayed them. I didn't want him to think I was some bitter, jealous sister. I just described her as dramatic and attention-seeking and left it at that. "I'm sure she's grown out of whatever teenage phase she was going through," Zach said when I expressed my nervousness about the visit. "People change, Jenna, especially when they see how happy you are." God, he was so optimistic. It was one of the things I loved most about him, but it also made him completely unprepared for Hurricane Claire. We drove to Grand Rapids the Saturday before Easter. Claire was home from her sophomore year at Michigan State, and my parents had planned this big family dinner to celebrate our engagement. I'd been dreading it for weeks, but Zach was genuinely excited. "I love meeting families," he told me as we pulled into my parents' driveway. "It's like getting to see all the different pieces that made you who you are." Claire answered the door before we could even knock. She was wearing this sundress that looked like it cost more than my rent, and her hair was perfectly curled in that effortless way that actually takes hours to achieve. "You must be Zach," she said, throwing her arms around him like they were old friends. "I'm Claire, the fun sister." The fun sister. Not the younger sister. Not just Claire. The fun sister. Like I was what? The boring one. But Zach laughed and hugged her back, and I watched him take in her perfect smile, and her perfect hair, and her perfect everything. For just a second, I saw him the way Claire would see him. Handsome, successful, and engaged to someone who wasn't her. Dinner was actually pleasant, which should have made me happy, but instead made me more nervous. Claire was on her best behavior, asking Zach thoughtful questions about his family and his business plans. She complimented the ring and gushed about how happy I looked. She even offered to help with wedding planning. "I have such good taste," she said, winking at Zach. "And I know all the best vendors in town. I could totally be your maid of honor," and wedding planner rolled into one. Maid of honor. I hadn't even asked her to be in the wedding yet, and she was already assuming she'd have the most important role. "That's so sweet of you to offer," I said carefully, "but we're planning to have a pretty small wedding. We might not even do a bridal party." Claire's face fell for just a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, of course. I just want to help however I can. This is such an exciting time." After dinner, while my parents were cleaning up, Claire suggested that she give Zach a tour of our old neighborhood. "There's this great ice cream place that's been here since we were kids," she said. "Jenna's probably told you all about it." I hadn't told him about it. I'd barely talked about my hometown at all because most of my memories here involved Claire upstaging me in some way. "That sounds great," Zach said. "Jenna want to come." Actually, Claire jumped in before I could answer. "Why don't you stay and help Mom with the dishes? I know she wants to talk to you about the wedding details. Zach and I will just be gone for like 20 minutes. And somehow I found myself watching my fiancé walk away with my sister, that familiar knot forming in my stomach. They were gone for an hour and a half. When they got back, they were both laughing about some story Claire had told him about our high school drama teacher. "She made the whole class reenact Romeo and Juliet," Claire was saying, "and Jenna was so serious about it. She actually memorized the entire balcony scene." "That's amazing," Zach said, looking at me with this new appreciation. "You never told me you were into theater." I wasn't into theater. I'd only auditioned for that play because Claire had begged me to, and then she'd gotten the lead role while I was stuck playing a servant with 3 lines. But somehow, in Claire's retelling, it had become this charming story about my hidden talents. That night, as Zach and I lay in bed in my childhood room, he was unusually quiet. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. "Your sister," he said, and my blood went cold. "She's really something. I can see why you two have such a complicated relationship." "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a moment. "She's just so vibrant, and she clearly adores you. The way she talks about you, all the stories she told me tonight. She's so proud of who you've become." I wanted to tell him that he was wrong, that Claire's pride was just another form of competition. But how could I explain 25 years of subtle warfare to someone who grew up in a house where siblings actually supported each other? Instead, I said, "I'm glad you guys got along." But I wasn't glad. I was terrified. Over the next few months, Claire started calling me more often. She wanted updates on our wedding plans, suggestions for venues, input on dress styles. At first, I was cautiously optimistic. Maybe Zach was right. Maybe she had changed, but then she started calling Zach too. It started innocently enough. She'd call me about something wedding-related, and if I wasn't available, she'd call him. "I just wanted to get his opinion on the flowers," she'd explain. "You know how guys have different perspectives on things." Soon she was texting both of us in a group chat about wedding stuff. Then she started texting just him. "Don't tell Jenna," she'd write. "But I found the perfect photographer. I want to surprise her." The surprises kept coming. A cake tasting that she'd arranged without telling me. A venue tour that she'd booked during my class schedule so I couldn't attend. Each time Zach would come home excited about Claire's latest discovery. "She has such great taste," he'd say. "And she's working so hard to make this perfect for you." For me? Right. The real wake-up call came in July, about 3 months before our October wedding. Claire had driven down to Chicago for the weekend ostensibly to help me pick out bridesmaid dresses. We'd finally decided to have a small bridal party after all. Just Claire and my roommate Sarah. Saturday afternoon, the 3 of us went to this boutique in Lincoln Park that Claire had found online. Sarah found a dress she loved pretty quickly, but Claire kept trying on option after option, modeling each one for Zach when we got back to our apartment. "What do you think of this one?" she'd ask, twirling in front of him. Is it too much? Too little? I want to make sure I don't upstage the bride. But she did want to upstage me. That was the whole point. Sunday morning, I woke up early to go for a run. It was one of those perfect Chicago summer days, and I wanted to clear my head before Claire drove back to school. When I got back to the apartment sweaty and exhausted, I could hear laughter coming from the kitchen. I found Zach and Claire making breakfast together, moving around each other with an ease that made my stomach clench. They looked comfortable. Too comfortable. Morning, sleepyhead, Claire said, not looking up from the pancakes she was flipping. Zach was just telling me about this conference he's going to in Des Moines next month. The Agricultural Tech Summit, Zach added, passing Claire the syrup. Claire thinks I should present my sustainability research there. Since when did Claire know anything about agricultural technology? Since when did she even pretend to care about that stuff? But there she was, nodding thoughtfully, as Zach explained his research, asking intelligent questions that I wasn't even sure I would have thought to ask. When had she become so interested in his work? That afternoon, after Claire left, I tried to talk to Zach about what I was feeling. I think Claire might be getting a little too involved in our relationship, I said carefully. Zach looked genuinely confused. What do you mean she's just being supportive? She's calling you directly now, planning things without including me. It just feels what? Like she's trying to insert herself into our relationship. Zach sat down on the couch and pulled me next to him. Jenna, I think you're reading too much into this. Claire loves you. She wants our wedding to be perfect because she wants you to be happy. You don't understand, I said, feeling frustrated and petty and unable to explain why. This is what she does. She finds ways to make herself the center of attention. But she's not the center of attention, Zach said gently. You are. It's our wedding, our life. Nothing Claire does can change that. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. But I'd seen this movie before, and I knew how it ended. The signs became harder to ignore over the next month. Claire started driving down to Chicago almost every weekend, always with some wedding-related excuse. She needed to check out photographers. She wanted to help me address invitations. She'd found a caterer that she absolutely had to show us. But she spent more time talking to Zach than she did helping me with anything. They developed inside jokes that I wasn't part of. They'd exchange looks across the dinner table that seemed to exclude me entirely. Did you know Zach played guitar in college? Claire asked me one Friday night over dinner. He was in a band called Harvest Moon. Isn't that the most romantic name? I didn't know that. In 3 years of dating, Zach had never mentioned playing guitar or being in a band. But somehow, Claire had discovered it in the span of one afternoon. You should play something for us, she suggested, batting her eyelashes at him. I don't really play anymore, Zach said, but he was smiling in a way that suggested he might be willing to be convinced. Oh, come on, Claire pressed. I bet you're amazing. I can always tell when someone has musical talent. An hour later, Zach was playing Wonderwall on his old acoustic guitar while Claire sang along, and I sat there feeling like a stranger in my own relationship. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in September, exactly 1 month before our wedding date. I'd been at the library late working on a project for my thesis advisor, and I came home around 10 o'clock expecting to find Zach grading papers or watching TV. Instead, I found our apartment dark and quiet. His car was in the parking lot, so I knew he was home. I called out his name as I climbed the stairs to our second-floor unit, but there was no answer. I unlocked the door and stepped into the living room, and that's when I heard it. Laughter. Coming from our bedroom. Not just any laughter, Claire's laughter. For a moment, I stood frozen in the hallway, trying to process what I was hearing. Claire was supposed to be in East Lansing. She had classes. She had a life 3 hours away that didn't involve showing up unannounced in my apartment on a Tuesday night. I walked toward the bedroom like I was moving through quicksand, each step harder than the last. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I could see Claire sitting on our bed in one of my old Northwestern t-shirts and a pair of underwear. Just underwear. Zach was sitting next to her, fully clothed, but close enough that their knees were touching. Too close. Way too close. You're terrible, Claire was saying playfully, shoving his shoulder. I can't believe you just said that. What? It's true, Zach replied, and his voice had this tone I'd never heard before. Flirtatious. Intimate. The way he used to talk to me when we were first falling in love. I must have made some kind of noise because suddenly they both looked toward the door. When Zach saw me standing there, his face went white. Jenna, he said, jumping up from the bed. I didn't hear you come in. Claire, meanwhile, didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. She just smiled and waved like this was the most normal thing in the world. Hey, sis, she said. Surprise. What are you doing here? I asked, and my voice sounded strange and distant, like it was coming from someone else. Oh, I drove down to surprise you guys, Claire said, stretching like a cat. But you were at the library, so Zach and I were just hanging out. We've been having the most interesting conversation about life goals and compatibility and stuff like that. Life goals. Compatibility. The kinds of conversations that engaged couples have with each other, not with their future sister-in-law. Claire, Zach said, and there was something in his voice. Guilt, maybe, or warning. Maybe you should get dressed. Why, she asked innocently, we're all family here. But we weren't family. Not yet. And the way Zach was looking at her, the way she was looking back at him, I had a terrible feeling we never would be. I think I should go, I said, quietly. No, don't go, Claire said, finally standing up from the bed. We should all talk. There's something I need to tell you. The words hit me like a physical blow. What kind of something? Claire looked at Zach and he looked back at her, and in that exchange I saw everything I needed to know. Jenna, Zach said, and his voice was barely above a whisper. Sit down. No. I backed toward the door. No, I'm not sitting down. I'm not doing this. Whatever this is. Jenna, please, Claire said, and for the first time, she actually looked sorry. You have to understand, neither of us meant for this to happen. This. There was a this that they'd been hiding from me, a this that had happened in my own apartment, in my own bed. How long? I asked. Zach and Claire looked at each other again. How long? I repeated louder this time. 2 months, Zach said finally. Since the weekend we went to that wine tasting in Michigan. 2 months. They'd been carrying on behind my back for 2 months, and I'd been so busy planning our wedding that I hadn't even noticed. No, that wasn't true. I had noticed. I'd seen the signs, felt the change, sensed something shifting between them. But I told myself I was being paranoid, jealous, crazy. I'd gaslit myself to avoid facing the truth. We tried to fight it, Claire said, and she actually had the audacity to look like she expected sympathy. But Jenna, you have to admit that you and Zach haven't been really happy lately. You've been so stressed about the wedding, so focused on school. You barely even talk to each other anymore. That was rich coming from someone who'd been monopolizing my fiancé's attention for months. And Zach and I we connect on this really deep level. We want the same things, we laugh at the same jokes, we just fit together in a way that what I demanded, in a way that Zach and I don't. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The answer was written all over her face. I looked at Zach, this man I'd planned to marry, this man I'd trusted with my whole heart. Is that how you feel? That we don't fit? He was quiet for so long that I thought he might not answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken. I love you, Jenna. I do. But Claire is right. We've been growing apart, and I didn't want to admit it. And then Claire and I started talking, really talking, and I realized what? That maybe we want different things. That maybe we're not as compatible as I thought we were. I felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out my heart. So you decided to figure that out by sleeping with my sister. We haven't slept together, Claire said quickly. Well, not yet. We've been trying to figure out the right way to tell you. Not yet, but they were planning to. They'd been planning my replacement while I addressed wedding invitations and tasted cakes and picked out flowers for a ceremony that was never going to happen. I pulled my engagement ring off my finger, that beautiful, perfect ring that Zach had given me on top of a mountain when everything still felt possible, and threw it at his feet. There, I said. Now you don't have to figure out how to tell me anything. I turned and walked toward the door, but Claire's voice stopped me. Jenna, wait. Please don't be like this. You weren't really happy. You know you weren't. This is better for everyone. I turned around and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was still wearing my t-shirt, still standing in my bedroom next to my ex-fiancé, still acting like she'd done me some kind of favor by destroying my life. You know what, Claire, I said, and my voice was steady, now controlled. You're right. I wasn't happy. I was terrified. I was terrified that this exact thing would happen because it's what always happens. You see something that's mine and you take it. That's not fair, she said. You can't own a person. If Zach is meant to be with me, then that's just how it's supposed to be. Meant to be with you, I repeated. Right. Just like Tommy Martinez was meant to be with you. Just like every friend I ever brought home was meant to like you better. Just like Peanut was meant to be yours. Claire actually rolled her eyes. We're not talking about a stuffed animal, Jenna. We're talking about real adult relationships. No, I said, we're talking about the fact that you can't stand for me to have anything that you don't have. And the really sad part is that you don't even want Zach. You just want to win. I looked at Zach one more time. He was standing there looking miserable and guilty and lost. And for a second, I almost felt sorry for him. He had no idea what he'd gotten himself into. You think you know her, I told him. But you don't. You think this is about love, but it's not. It's about possession. And once she gets bored with you, once she proves that she can take you away from me, she'll move on to the next shiny thing. You're wrong, Claire said, but there was something in her voice, uncertainty maybe, that suggested she wasn't as confident as she wanted to appear. Maybe I am, I said. I guess we'll find out. I walked out of that apartment and didn't look back. I drove to Sarah's place and spent the night on her couch crying until I had no tears left. The next morning, I called my parents to tell them that the wedding was off. My mother's response will haunt me for the rest of my life. Oh, honey, she said, and she sounded tired rather than shocked. What did you do? What did I do? Not what happened, not how can we fix this, not I'm so sorry you're hurting. What did I do? When I explained that Zach had fallen in love with Claire, that they'd been carrying on an affair behind my back, my mother was quiet for a long moment. Well, she finally said, these things happen. Maybe it's for the best. If Zach wasn't committed to you, it's better to find out now than after the wedding. Mom, Claire betrayed me. She seduced my fiancé. Jenna, that's a very dramatic way to put it. Sometimes people just connect with each other. You can't force someone to love you if their heart is somewhere else. I felt like I was losing my mind. So you're taking her side. I'm not taking anyone's side. I just think that maybe this is an opportunity for both of you girls to figure out what you really want. Both of us girls. Like Claire and I had equal blame in this situation. I hung up on her. 3 days later, Sarah helped me pack up everything I owned into her Honda Civic. I'd already accepted a job offer at a small PR firm in Chicago that I'd been considering as a backup plan. It didn't pay much, but it was enough to start over. Before I left town, I drove by our old apartment one more time. Zach's car was there, and so was Claire's. They'd moved fast. I sat in my car across the street for maybe 10 minutes, not sure what I was hoping to see, or why I was torturing myself. Then the front door opened and they came out together. Zach looked awful, like he hadn't slept in weeks. But Claire looked radiant. She was laughing at something he'd said hanging on his arm like she belonged there. She saw my car and waved, actually waved like we were old friends who'd run into each other at the grocery store. That's when I knew I was done. Done with Claire, done with my family, done with trying to make people love me who were determined not to. I drove away and didn't come back for 10 years. The last thing I heard through the grapevine was that Claire and Zach had gotten married 6 months later in a small ceremony at my parents' house. The same house where we'd planned to hold our reception. My mother sent me a wedding photo. Claire was wearing a dress that looked suspiciously similar to one I'd tried on and loved but decided was too expensive. I threw the photo away and changed my phone number. But standing there at my mother's funeral, watching Claire's face crumble as she realized who my husband was, I finally understood something that had taken me 10 years to figure out. Claire had won the battle, but I'd won the war. She'd gotten Zach, but I'd gotten my freedom. And with that freedom, I'd built something real, something lasting, something that no one could take away from me. Not even her. The first year in Chicago was brutal. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There were nights when I questioned everything, when I wondered if I'd made a huge mistake by walking away from everything I'd ever known. I was living in this tiny studio apartment in Wicker Park with my cousin Marina, who was fresh out of art school and waiting tables while trying to make it as a graphic designer. The place was maybe 400 square feet, and we had to share everything. The bed, the bathroom, the single closet that could barely hold both our wardrobes. But Marina saved my life in those early months. She was the opposite of everyone I'd grown up with. Loud, messy, unapologetically authentic. She said exactly what she thought, ate ice cream for breakfast when she felt like it, and had this incredible ability to find joy in the smallest things. "You know what your problem is," she told me about 2 weeks after I moved in. We were sitting on our fire escape at 2 a.m, sharing a bottle of cheap wine and watching the city lights twinkle below us. "Just one problem?" I asked, because honestly, I felt like I had about 100 problems at that point. "You've been living your whole life trying not to rock the boat," she said. "You've been so worried about keeping everyone else happy that you forgot to figure out what actually makes you happy." She was right, of course. I'd spent 27 years being the good daughter, the accommodating sister, the easy girlfriend. I'd never really asked myself what I wanted. I'd just focused on being what other people needed me to be. "So, what do I do about it?" I asked. Marina grinned and raised her wine glass. "You start saying yes to things that scare you." That became our motto for the next 2 years. Say yes to things that scare you. The job at the PR firm was fine, but it wasn't exactly challenging. I was essentially a glorified assistant, making coffee runs and organizing files, and writing the occasional press release about corporate mergers that no one would ever read. But it paid the bills, and more importantly, it taught me how the industry really worked. During the day, I was learning everything I could about public relations marketing and brand management. But at night, after I got home from the office, I was building something of my own. I started freelancing on the side, taking on small projects for local businesses that couldn't afford the big agencies. A new restaurant that needed help with their grand opening. A boutique clothing store that wanted to rebrand their image. A tech startup that was looking for someone to manage their social media presence. The work was exhausting, but it was mine. Every late night, every weekend spent writing copy and pitching journalists and brainstorming campaign ideas. It all felt like I was building something that no one could take away from me. Marina was my biggest cheerleader during this time. She'd designed my first business cards on her ancient laptop, and she'd stay up with me when I was stressed about a presentation or worried about landing a new client. "You're going to be running your own agency someday," she'd tell me. "I can feel it. You've got that hungry look in your eyes." I did feel hungry. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had something to prove, but not to anyone else. To myself. About 8 months after I moved to Chicago, Marina started dating this guy named Jake who worked in tech. He was nice enough, but he had this annoying habit of trying to set me up with his friends. "You need to get back out there," he'd say every time he came over for dinner. "There are tons of great guys in this city. You just have to be open to meeting them." But I wasn't open to meeting them. The thought of dating anyone, of opening myself up to that kind of vulnerability again, made me feel physically sick. Marina understood. but she also worried about me. "I'm not saying you need to fall in love," she'd tell me, "but maybe you could just hang out with people, make some friends who aren't related to you or paying you for graphic design work." She had a point. My social life consisted entirely of Marina Jake and the woman who made my coffee every morning at the place down the street. I was becoming a hermit, and not in a cute, quirky way. So, when Marina suggested that I join her book club, I said yes. Even though the idea of sitting in a room full of strangers and discussing feelings about literature sounded like my personal version of hell. The book club met every other Thursday at this cozy wine bar in Lincoln Park. There were about 8 women, all in their 20s and 30s, all at different stages of their careers and relationships. The books were hit or miss, but the wine was good, and slowly, very slowly, I started to relax around people again. That's where I met Sarah Chen, who would become one of my closest friends. She was a marketing director at a small biotech company, and she had this dry sense of humor that reminded me of Marina. "You know," Sarah said to me one night after we'd thoroughly dissected a particularly terrible romance novel, "my company is looking for someone to help us with our public image. We're doing some really cool research, but we're terrible at explaining it to people who don't have PhDs in molecular biology." I was immediately interested. Biotech was having a moment in the early 2010s, and I knew that getting in on the ground floor with the right company could be huge for my freelance business. "Tell me more," I said. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the sleek conference room of Reeve Biotechnology presenting my ideas for their upcoming product launch to a room full of scientists and executives. And that's where I met Nathan. He walked into the room about 5 minutes after I'd started my presentation, and I have to admit, he completely threw me off my game. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that was just starting to go gray at the temples, and these incredibly warm brown eyes. He was wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, but there was something approachable about him that kept him from looking intimidating. "Sorry I'm late," he said, taking a seat at the far end of the table. "Please continue." I tried to get back into my rhythm, but I kept finding myself glancing in his direction. He was paying attention in a way that most executives don't, taking actual notes, asking thoughtful questions, really engaging with the material. When I finished my presentation, there was a moment of silence before he started clapping. "That was excellent," he said. "You've managed to take our incredibly boring research and make it sound like something people might actually care about." "That's the goal," I said, trying to keep my voice professional, even though something about his smile was making my heart race. After the meeting, Sarah introduced us properly. "Nathan Reeve, meet Jenna Walters." "Jenna, this is Nathan, our CEO, and the guy who signs my paychecks." "And hopefully yours too," Nathan said, extending his hand. "If you're interested in working with us." His handshake was firm and warm, and he held on just a second longer than strictly necessary. "I have to ask," he said, "are you related to the Walters family that owns the grain elevators in Western Michigan?" "No," I said quickly, probably too quickly. "Different Walters family entirely." It was a lie, of course. My grandfather had indeed owned grain elevators, and my father had worked for the family business before it was sold when I was in high school. But I wasn't ready to talk about my family history with a potential client. Nathan seemed to sense my discomfort and smoothly changed the subject. "Well, regardless of your agricultural connections, I'd love to hire you for this project. When can you start?" Working with Reeve, biotechnology was a game changer for my freelance business. Not only did they pay well, but their research was genuinely fascinating. They were working on sustainable alternatives to traditional pesticides, developing new ways to increase crop yields without destroying the environment. Nathan was the kind of CEO you read about in business magazines, but never actually meet in real life. He was brilliant, obviously, but he also cared deeply about the impact his company was having on the world. He'd started Reeve Biotech after his wife died of cancer, with the goal of creating technologies that could help feed people without poisoning them. Wait, let me back up. I didn't know about his wife right away. That came later. At first, our relationship was strictly professional. I'd come in once or twice a week to work on campaigns, and Nathan would check in on my progress, offer feedback, sometimes join me for lunch in the company cafeteria. He was easy to talk to in a way that surprised me. Most executives I'd worked with were either micromanagers who questioned every decision or absent figures who barely acknowledged my existence. But Nathan found this perfect balance. He trusted me to do my job while still being genuinely interested in my process. "How did you get into PR?" he asked me one afternoon. We were sitting in his office going over the final details for a trade publication ad campaign. "Honestly, I kind of fell into it," I said. "I was always good at writing, and I had this professor in grad school who suggested I look into communications. It turned out I had a knack for translating complex ideas into simple language." "That's a rare skill," he said, "especially in our industry. Most scientists think that if they use enough jargon, people will be impressed by their intelligence." I laughed, and most PR people think that if they use enough buzzwords, people will be impressed by their creativity. "So you're the rare person who can bridge both worlds." "I try to be." We worked together for about 6 months before I realized that our conversations had started extending beyond work topics. He'd ask about my weekend plans, my thoughts on books. He was reading my opinions on everything from Chicago pizza to climate change policy, and I found myself looking forward to those conversations more than I probably should have. The turning point came when Sarah invited me to the company's annual holiday party. It was being held at this gorgeous venue downtown, and I'd spent way too much money on a new dress because I wanted to look professional, but also, well, because I wanted to look good. Nathan found me almost immediately after I arrived. "You clean up nice," he said, and there was something in his voice that made me look at him differently. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, and he looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. But more than that, he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. "Dance with me," he asked when the band started playing. I should have said no. He was my client, technically my boss for this project. Dancing with him crossed a line that I'd been very careful not to cross, but Marina's voice echoed in my head. "Say yes to things that scare you." "Okay," I said. He led me onto the dance floor, and when he put his arms around me, everything else seemed to fade away. He was a good dancer, confident, but not showy, and he held me close enough that I could smell his cologne, something warm and woody that made me want to lean closer. "Can I tell you something?" he said as we swayed to the music. "Sure." "I've been looking forward to this all week. Not the party, this, dancing with you." My heart did this little flip thing that I hadn't felt since Zach. But this was different, quieter, more real. "Nathan," I said carefully, "I should probably mention that I don't really date. It's complicated, but I'm not really in a place where I can—" "Hey," he said gently, "we're just dancing, no pressure, no expectations, just two people enjoying a song." But we both knew it was more than that. After the party, our working relationship shifted subtly. There was an awareness between us now, an electricity that hadn't been there before. But Nathan was true to his word about not pressuring me. He never asked me out, never made me feel uncomfortable, never crossed any lines. Instead, he just became my friend. He started inviting me to lunch, not to discuss work, but just to talk. He'd recommend books he thought I'd like, send me articles he found interesting, ask for my opinion on everything from local politics to the best coffee shops in the city. Slowly, carefully, I started to open up to him. I told him about my move to Chicago, about starting over in a new city, about the challenges of building a business from scratch. I didn't mention Claire or Zach or the real reason I left Michigan, but I shared enough for him to understand that I'd been hurt before. "You know what I admire about you," he said one day. We were walking along the lakefront after a client meeting, and the afternoon sun was turning the water gold. "What's that? You're one of the bravest people I've ever met, and you don't even realize it." I laughed. "I'm not brave. I'm probably the least brave person you know." Are you kidding? You left everything you knew to start over in a new city. You built a business from nothing. You put yourself out there every day, even though it would be easier to play it safe. That's not bravery, I said. That's just stubbornness. Sometimes they're the same thing. We'd been working together for almost a year when Nathan finally told me about his wife. Her name was Emma, and she died of ovarian cancer 3 years earlier. They'd been married for 8 years, and from the way Nathan talked about her, it was clear that he'd loved her deeply. She was a pediatric nurse, he said. We were sitting in his office after hours, and he was showing me pictures on his phone. Emma was beautiful, petite and blonde with kind eyes and a smile that lit up her whole face. She would have loved you, he said. She always said that the world needed more people who could make complicated things simple. Tell me about her, I said. So he did. He told me about how they'd met in college, how she'd convinced him to change his major from business to biochemistry, how she'd supported his dream of starting his own company, even though it meant years of financial uncertainty. She's the reason I started Reeve Biotech, he said. During her treatments, we met so many people who were dealing with cancers caused by environmental factors, pesticides, industrial chemicals, things that were supposed to make life better but were actually making people sick. She sounds incredible. She was, and she made me promise before she died that I wouldn't stop living, that I'd find happiness again, even if it looked different than what we'd planned. He looked at me when he said that last part, and I felt something shift between us. A few weeks later, Sarah approached me with an interesting opportunity. The company's been invited to co-sponsor a TEDx event, she said. They want someone to give a talk about sustainable agriculture and its impact on public health. Nathan thinks you'd be perfect for it. Me, I'm not a scientist, I'm just the PR person. That's exactly why you'd be perfect. You know how to talk to regular people about this stuff. And honestly, I think Nathan just wants an excuse to work more closely with you. The TEDx event was 3 months away, which gave us plenty of time to prepare. Nathan and I spent hours working on my presentation, crafting the perfect message, practicing the delivery, until I could give the talk in my sleep. But somewhere in the process of preparing for the talk, our relationship deepened into something I hadn't expected. We started spending more time together outside of work. Coffee meetings that turned into long walks, dinner meetings that turned into conversations that lasted until midnight. He told me about his childhood on a farm in Iowa, his dreams of making agriculture more sustainable, his struggles with grief and moving forward after Emma's death. And slowly, carefully, I started to tell him about my past. I told him about Claire, about the pattern of taking that had defined our relationship, about the way I'd always felt like I was competing for love and attention. That sounds exhausting, he said, always having to prove your worth. It was. I didn't even realize how exhausting it was until I moved here and didn't have to do it anymore. I told him about Zach, about the betrayal, and the broken engagement, and the way my family had failed to support me when I needed them most. I'm sorry, he said simply. You deserved better than that. It was such a simple response, but it meant everything to me. He didn't try to minimize my pain or suggest that I should forgive and forget. He just acknowledged that what had happened to me was wrong. The night of the TEDx event, I was terrified. I'd given plenty of presentations before, but never to an audience of 500 people, and never about something so personal. Nathan found me backstage, pacing and practicing my opening lines for the 100th time. Hey, he said, putting his hands on my shoulders. You're going to be amazing. You know this material better than anyone. What if I forget everything? What if I freeze up there? What if... He kissed me. It was soft and gentle and perfect, and when we broke apart, all my anxiety had melted away. What was that for? I asked. For luck, he said, and because I've been wanting to do that for months. I gave the best presentation of my life that night. I talked about the connection between environmental health and human health, about the importance of sustainable agriculture, about the responsibility we all have to make choices that protect both people and the planet. But more than that, I talked about second chances, about the courage it takes to start over to build something new from the ashes of something that didn't work out. When I finished, the audience gave me a standing ovation. But the only person I could see was Nathan standing in the wings with this enormous smile on his face. "So," he said when I came off stage, "that happened. The presentation, the kiss." I felt my cheeks flush. "Yeah, that happened too." "Any regrets?" I thought about it for exactly half a second. "None." "Good," he said, "because I was hoping we could do it again." And we did, right there backstage with the sound of applause still echoing from the auditorium. Our first official date was 2 weeks later. Nathan picked me up at 7 o'clock on a Friday night, and instead of taking me to some fancy restaurant, he drove us to a little taco truck that parked outside Wrigley Field. "This is my favorite place in the city," he said as we sat on a park bench eating the best fish tacos I'd ever had in my life. "Emma and I used to come here after Cubs games. She was convinced that these tacos had magical powers." It could have been awkward him talking about his late wife on our first date, but it wasn't. It felt natural, like he was sharing a piece of his history with me, not comparing me to someone else. "What kind of magical powers?" I asked. "The power to make everything better," he said. "Bad day at work, fight with her parents, Cubs losing streak. These tacos could fix anything." "Do they work for post-TEDx talk anxiety?" He laughed. "Let's find out." We sat there until almost midnight, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his dreams of expanding the company, of developing new technologies that could help farmers around the world. I told him about my goal of growing my freelance business into a real agency of working with companies that were actually making a difference. "We make a good team," he said as he walked me to my door. "We do," I agreed. He kissed me goodnight, soft and sweet, and I floated up to my apartment feeling like I was 16 years old. Marina was waiting for me with a bottle of wine and a million questions. "So," she said the moment I walked through the door. "So what? Don't play dumb with me. How was the date?" I couldn't stop smiling. "It was perfect. Perfect. How details, woman. I need details." I told her everything. The taco truck, the conversation, the way Nathan made me feel like I was the most interesting person in the world. "He sounds amazing," Marina said. "But more importantly, you sound happy, like really happy." She was right. I was happy in a way I hadn't been in years. Not just content or satisfied, but genuinely deeply happy. Nathan and I took things slowly. After everything I'd been through with Zach, I was gun-shy about rushing into anything. But Nathan seemed to understand that, instinctively. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give, never made me feel like I had to prove my commitment or compete for his attention. Instead, he just showed up. Consistently, reliably, thoughtfully. When I had food poisoning and spent 2 days basically dying in my apartment, he brought me soup and ginger ale and sat with me while I watched terrible movies. When I landed my biggest client ever, a startup that was developing plant-based meat alternatives, he took me out to celebrate and listened while I talked through all my fears and excitement about growing my business. When I had a panic attack in the middle of Target because someone behind me was wearing the same cologne Zach used to wear, Nathan drove across town to pick me up and didn't ask a single question about what had triggered it. He just held me until I stopped shaking and then took me home. "You don't have to tell me," he said as we sat on my couch. "But if you want to, I'm here." So I told him about the cologne, about the flashbacks, about the way certain sounds or smells could still transport me back to that horrible night when my world fell apart. "Trauma is funny," he said. "It doesn't follow any logical timeline. Emma's perfume can still stop me in my tracks sometimes, even 3 years later." "Does it get easier?" "It gets different," he said. "The sharp edges wear down a little bit, but I don't think it ever completely goes away." "Do you think that's okay? That it's okay to still be affected by things that happened years ago?" "I think it makes you human," he said. "And I think the fact that you're still willing to try, still willing to put yourself out there despite everything you've been through, That makes you pretty extraordinary. We'd been dating for 8 months when Nathan asked me to move in with him. I know it's a big step, he said. We were lying in his bed on a lazy Sunday morning, and the light was filtering through his bedroom windows in these perfect golden squares. I've been thinking about it too, I said, but I have to ask, are you sure you're ready for this? For us to be together in that way? What do you mean? I mean, Emma, your house, your life, it's all still set up for the person you were with her. Are you ready to make space for someone new? It was a hard question, but it needed to be asked. Nathan's house was beautiful, a restored Victorian in Lincoln Park with original hardwood floors and these gorgeous bay windows. But it was still full of Emma's things. Her books on the shelves, her coffee mug in the kitchen cabinet, her photos on the mantel. Nathan was quiet for a long time. You're right, he said finally. I haven't really made space for anyone new because I didn't think I'd want to, but with you, I want to build something together. Something that's ours. So we did. We spent weeks going through his house together, deciding what to keep, what to pack away, what to donate. It wasn't about erasing Emma. She would always be part of Nathan's history, but about creating space for our future. I moved in on a crisp October morning, almost exactly 2 years after I'd given that TEDx talk. Marina helped me pack my things, and I felt this weird mix of excitement and nostalgia as I looked around our tiny studio one last time. You're going to be so happy, Marina said, hugging me goodbye. I can feel it. This is your person. She was right. Living with Nathan felt easy in a way that living with someone had never felt before. We had similar rhythms, both early risers who liked to start the day with coffee and the newspaper. We both valued quiet time and personal space, but we also genuinely enjoyed each other's company. More than that, we supported each other's ambitions. Nathan encouraged me to take bigger risks with my business, to go after clients I might have been too intimidated to approach before, and I helped him think through the public-facing aspects of his company, the ways they could better communicate their mission to potential investors and partners. We were partners in the truest sense of the word. 6 months after I moved in, I officially launched Walters Communications as a real agency. I rented a small office space in the Loop, hired 2 junior associates, and started going after the kinds of clients I'd only dreamed about working with before. Nathan was my first call when I signed my biggest contract ever, a year-long campaign for a clean energy company that was developing next-generation solar panels. I'm so proud of you, he said when I told him the news. You've worked so hard for this. We've worked hard for this, I corrected him. I couldn't have done any of this without your support. That night, he took me out to dinner at the fanciest restaurant in the city. We ordered champagne and the tasting menu, and I felt like I was celebrating not just the business success, but everything we'd built together. Can I ask you something? Nathan said as we were waiting for dessert. Of course. Do you ever think about getting married again? The question caught me off guard. We'd been together for over a year, and while I definitely thought about our future, I'd been trying not to get too far ahead of myself. Honestly, I used to think I never would, I said. After what happened with Zach, the whole idea of marriage felt tainted, like it was something that could be taken away from me. And now I think it depends on the person and the reason. What do you mean? I thought carefully about how to articulate what I was feeling. With Zach, I wanted to get married because it felt like the next logical step, because it was what you were supposed to do when you'd been together for a certain amount of time. But with you, if we got married, it would be because we actively chose each other. Not because we were following some script, but because we genuinely wanted to build a life together. Nathan smiled. That's exactly how I feel. Is that your way of asking me to marry you? Not yet, he said. But maybe someday soon. Someday soon turned out to be 3 months later on a completely ordinary Tuesday evening in February. I'd had a long day at the office dealing with a difficult client and a campaign that wasn't coming together the way I'd envisioned. I came home exhausted, and frustrated, ready to collapse on the couch with a glass of wine and some mindless television. Instead, I found Nathan in the kitchen, cooking dinner and humming along to the jazz music he had playing on the stereo. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing me hello. "Terrible," I said. "But better now." "Good, because I have something to ask you." He turned off the stove and walked over to where I was standing by the kitchen island. Then, to my complete shock, he got down on one knee and pulled out a ring box. "Jenna," he said, "I know this isn't fancy, and I know we're both still in our work clothes, and I know you probably wanted more romance than this. But I was sitting in my office today thinking about how much I love coming home to you, and I realized I don't want to wait for the perfect moment anymore." I was already crying. "You make me better," he continued. "You make me braver and kinder and more hopeful about the future. You've shown me that it's possible to build something beautiful from something broken. And I want to spend the rest of my life building beautiful things with you." He opened the ring box, and inside was the most perfect engagement ring I'd ever seen. It wasn't huge or flashy, just a simple, elegant solitaire that caught the kitchen light and threw tiny rainbows on the ceiling. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," I said, because there was no other possible answer. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto my finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been made specifically for me. "How did you know my size?" I asked through my tears. "Marina helped," he admitted. "I've been planning this for weeks, but I wanted it to feel spontaneous. I wanted it to feel like us." And it did. It felt exactly like us. Simple, honest, real. We decided to have a small wedding. After everything I'd been through with planning my first wedding, the idea of a big, elaborate ceremony held no appeal for me. Instead, we got married on a Saturday morning in October at the Lincoln Park Conservatory with just our closest friends and Nathan's family in attendance. I wore a simple cream-colored dress that I'd found at a vintage shop in Wicker Park. Marina did my hair and makeup, and Sarah was my maid of honor. Nathan's brother was his best man, and the whole ceremony lasted maybe 20 minutes. But it was perfect. When the officiant asked if we had rings to exchange, Nathan surprised me with a vintage men's band that had belonged to his grandfather. "Something old," he whispered as I slipped it onto his finger. When it was time for our vows, I almost couldn't speak through my tears. "Nathan," I managed to say, "you taught me that love doesn't have to be a competition, that I don't have to earn affection or fight for attention. With you, I learned that the right person will choose you every day, not because they have to, but because they want to. And you taught me," Nathan said, "that starting over doesn't mean starting from scratch, that we can take the best parts of our past and use them to build something new, something better." After the ceremony, we had lunch at our favorite restaurant, the same place where we'd had our first official date. Everyone laughed and told stories and toasted our future, and I felt surrounded by love in a way I'd never experienced before. That night, as Nathan and I lay in bed in our hotel room overlooking Lake Michigan, I felt this profound sense of peace. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked. "The way things ended with your family?" "Sometimes," I said honestly, "I regret that it had to happen that way. But I don't regret the choices I made after. If I hadn't left Michigan, if I hadn't moved to Chicago, if I hadn't started over completely, I never would have met you." "Do you think you'll ever want kids?" he asked. It was a question we danced around for months, and I appreciated that he was brave enough to ask it directly. "I don't think so," I said. "I used to think I did when I was with Zach, but now I think that was more about following the expected timeline than about actually wanting to be a mother." "I feel the same way," Nathan said. "Emma and I talked about having kids, but after she died, the idea lost its appeal. I think I'm more interested in building other things." "Like what?" "Like a business that actually makes a difference. Like a marriage based on genuine partnership. Like a life that we design intentionally instead of just falling into." "I love that," I said, "an intentional life. And that's exactly what we built over the next few years. We grew our respective businesses, traveled to places we'd always wanted to see, bought a weekend cabin in Wisconsin where we could escape from the city. We hosted dinner parties for our friends, supported causes we cared about, and created traditions that were uniquely ours. Every Christmas, we'd volunteer at a local food bank. Every summer, we'd take a week-long hiking trip somewhere new. We talked about everything: our fears, our dreams, our opinions on politics and art, and whether pineapple belongs on pizza. We disagreed sometimes, but we never fought. We'd learned how to communicate with respect and kindness, how to work through problems together instead of letting them fester. Most importantly, we made each other better. Nathan pushed me to take risks I wouldn't have taken on my own, and I helped him see perspectives he might have missed. We were genuinely interested in each other's growth and success. By the time my mother called to tell me that she was dying, Nathan and I had been married for almost 4 years. We'd built this beautiful, intentional life together, and I was happier than I'd ever imagined possible. But I'd also created this completely separate existence from my family. For almost a decade, I'd managed to avoid thinking about Claire or Zach or the life I'd left behind in Michigan, until suddenly, I couldn't avoid it anymore. "I have to go back," I told Nathan after I hung up the phone. "For the funeral." "I know," he said, pulling me close, "and I'm coming with you." "You don't have to do that. It's going to be complicated and probably ugly and—" "Jenna," he said firmly, "you're my wife. Your complicated, ugly family stuff is my complicated, ugly family stuff now." Little did we know just how complicated it was about to get. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing client presentations in my office. I almost didn't answer when I saw the Grand Rapids area code. I'd successfully avoided contact with anyone from my hometown for almost 10 years. But something made me pick up. "Jenna," the voice was unfamiliar, shaky. "This is Dr. Morrison, from Spectrum Health. I'm calling about your mother, Linda Walters." My stomach dropped. "What about her? I'm sorry to have to tell you this over the phone, but she passed away this morning. She had a massive heart attack in her sleep. There was nothing we could have done." I sat there in my office chair, staring out at the Chicago skyline, trying to process what I just heard. My mother was dead. The woman who had raised me, who had failed to defend me when I needed her most, who had chosen neutrality over supporting her daughter. She was gone. "Miss Walters, are you there?" "Yes," I managed. "I'm here. What do I need to do?" The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and arrangements. My mother had apparently put me down as her emergency contact, which surprised me, given that we hadn't spoken in almost 10 years. Claire was listed second, which felt like one final comparison, even in death. I called Nathan immediately after I hung up with the hospital. "I need to go home," I told him. "My mother died." "Oh, sweetheart," he said, and I could hear him already getting up from his desk. "I'm so sorry. I'm coming home right now." "You don't have to." "Jenna, stop. I'm coming home and then we're going to figure out what you need." What I needed, it turned out, was my husband. Nathan took care of everything, rearranging his schedule, booking our flights, making sure my team at the agency could handle things while I was gone. He packed our bags while I sat on the bed staring at the black dress I hadn't worn since our friend's wedding the year before. "Are you okay?" he asked, sitting down next to me. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I thought I dealt with all of this years ago. The family stuff, the hurt, the anger, but sitting here knowing I'm going to have to see Claire again, knowing I'm going to have to go back to that place." "We don't have to stay long," Nathan said. "We'll go to the funeral, pay our respects, and come home. You don't owe anyone anything beyond that." But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Nothing with my family ever was. The flight to Grand Rapids was short, but it felt like traveling back in time. As we descended through the clouds, I could see the familiar landscape of Western Michigan. The flat farmland, the small towns connected by highways, the lake that had defined so many of my childhood summers. "It's beautiful," Nathan said, looking out the window. "It is," I agreed. "I'd forgotten how beautiful it is." We rented a car at the airport and drove to the hotel Nathan had booked downtown. Not the nicest place in the city, but clean and comfortable, and most importantly, not anywhere I might accidentally run into anyone I knew. "Do you want to drive by your childhood home?" Nathan asked as we checked in. "Not yet," I said. "Maybe tomorrow." That evening, we had dinner at a restaurant I'd never been to before. Nathan kept the conversation light, telling me stories about his own family, his memories of visiting his grandparents' farm as a kid. He was trying to distract me, and I loved him for it, but I couldn't stop thinking about what the next day would bring. "What if she's awful to you?" I asked him as we lay in bed that night. "Claire, what if she says something terrible?" "Then she says something terrible," Nathan said calmly. "And then we leave. I can handle whatever your sister dishes out, Jenna. I'm more worried about how you're going to handle seeing her again." I'd been wondering the same thing. The funeral was set for 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon at the Methodist church where my family had attended services when I was growing up. We arrived about 20 minutes early, and I was relieved to see that the parking lot wasn't too crowded. A small service just like my mother would have wanted. Nathan squeezed my hand as we walked up the front steps. "You ready for this?" "No," I said. "But let's do it anyway." The church looked exactly the same as I remembered. The same burgundy carpet, the same stained glass windows, the same smell of old hymnals and lemon furniture polish. But walking through those doors as an adult, as a successful businesswoman, with a loving husband by my side, I felt different. Stronger. We signed the guest book and made our way into the sanctuary. There were maybe 40 people scattered throughout the pews, neighbors, church friends, a few relatives I barely remembered. And there in the front row was Claire. She hadn't seen me yet. She was talking to an elderly woman I recognized as our former neighbor, and she looked exactly like Claire. Blonde hair, perfectly styled makeup, flawless, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. But there was something different about her, too. Something that looked like strain around her eyes, tension in her shoulders. Nathan and I took seats about halfway back, and I spent the next few minutes scanning the room looking for Zach. I didn't see him, which surprised me. I'd assumed he'd be there with Claire playing the role of the supportive husband. The service was simple and traditional. The pastor, who had been there since I was a child, spoke about my mother's dedication to her family and her community. A few people shared memories, stories about her volunteer work at the hospital, her famous apple pies, her love of gardening. No one mentioned that she had 2 daughters who hadn't spoken to each other in a decade. No one talked about the family that had fractured and never healed. During the final hymn, Claire finally turned around and spotted me. For a moment, our eyes met across the sanctuary, and I saw a flash of something. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. She gave me a small wave like we were old friends who had lost touch. Not sisters, who had been estranged for 10 years. After the service, everyone filed out to the fellowship hall for the reception. Nathan and I hung back, letting the crowd thin out before making our way over. "You don't have to do this," Nathan reminded me as we stood in the hallway. "Yes, I do," I said. "She's still my sister, and this is still my mother's funeral." The fellowship hall was set up with round tables covered in white tablecloths, and there was a buffet along one wall with the kind of food that church ladies had been making for decades: casseroles and jello salads and sheet cake with roses made of frosting. I was getting myself a cup of coffee when I heard Claire's voice behind me. "Well, well, well, look what the cat dragged in." I turned around, and there she was, standing close enough that I could smell her perfume, something expensive and overwhelming. "Hello, Claire," I said evenly. "I'm sorry for our loss." "Our loss?" she repeated like she was tasting the words. "Right. I wasn't sure you'd even show up. You know, since you've been so good at staying away all these years." I could feel Nathan tense beside me, but I kept my voice calm. "I'm here now." Claire looked me up and down, taking in my simple black dress, my understated jewelry, my hair that had been styled by a professional, but wasn't as elaborate as hers. "You look Well, you look exactly the same, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I guess some things never change. Some things do, I said. People grow up. They move on. Do they? Claire asked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're still the same old Jenna. Still hiding in the background, still keeping to yourself. She glanced around the room dramatically. I noticed you came alone. I was hoping maybe you'd finally found someone, but I guess, well, I guess some things really don't change. This was it. This was the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating for 10 years. Claire was making her assumptions, setting up her narrative about poor, lonely Jenna, who never recovered from losing Zach. Actually, I said, turning to Nathan, there's someone I'd like you to meet. Nathan stepped forward with that easy confidence I'd fallen in love with. He was wearing his best charcoal suit, and he looked every inch the successful executive he was. Claire, I said, savoring every word, I'd like you to meet my husband, Nathan Reeve. The change in Claire's expression was immediate and dramatic. The condescending smile faltered. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in my entire life, I watched my sister look genuinely shocked. Your husband, she repeated like the words didn't make sense. That's right, Nathan said, extending his hand with a warm smile. It's nice to finally meet you, Claire. Jenna's told me so much about you. Claire shook his hand automatically, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was trying to process this information, trying to figure out how I had managed to get married without her knowing about it. Nathan Reeve, she said slowly, like she was testing how the name sounded. That name, it sounds familiar. I run a biotech company here in the Midwest, Nathan said modestly. Maybe you've heard of Reeve Biotechnology. And that's when Claire went completely white. I watched her face cycle through confusion, recognition, and then something that looked like panic. She glanced around the room frantically like she was looking for an escape route. Reeve Biotechnology, she repeated, and her voice was barely above a whisper. You're Nathan Reeve. That's right, Nathan said, still smiling pleasantly. Do we know each other? Before Claire could answer, I heard a familiar voice from across the room. Jenna, is that really you? I turned around, and there was Zach. He looked even worse than he had at the funeral home that morning. Thinner, more tired, with an air of defeat that seemed to cling to him like cologne. He was walking toward us, and I could see the exact moment when he noticed Nathan standing next to me. His steps slowed, his eyes widened, and his face went through the same transformation that Claire's had moments earlier. Zach, I said calmly. How are you? But Zach wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at Nathan with an expression of pure horror. Mr. Reeve, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. I didn't expect to see you here. Zach, Nathan said, and suddenly his tone was more formal, more businesslike. What a surprise. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I looked between the three of them. Claire, who was still standing frozen in shock. Zach, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. And Nathan, who was maintaining his professional composure, but whose eyes had gone hard. I take it you two know each other, I said to Nathan. We do, Nathan said. Zach works for Agritech Solutions. My company recently acquired them. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just been dropped. I felt this rush of understanding, all the pieces clicking into place. Nathan's company had bought Zach's startup. My husband was now technically my ex-fiancé's boss. The irony was so perfect, so beautifully poetic, that I almost started laughing. Small world, I said, fighting to keep my voice neutral. Very small, Nathan agreed. Claire was looking back and forth between all of us like she was watching a tennis match. Wait, she said, her voice getting higher. Wait, you two know each other. We've had some business dealings, Nathan said diplomatically. Agritech has been struggling for the past few years, so we brought them into the Reeve family of companies. Struggling. That was a polite way of saying that Zach's company had been failing miserably. How long have you been married? Claire asked, suddenly turning back to me. 4 years, I said. We had a lovely ceremony in Chicago. 4 years, which meant Nathan and I had gotten married around the same time that Zach's company had started its downward spiral. 4 years, Claire repeated faintly, and Mom never said. Mom and I didn't talk much, I said simply. We grew apart after I moved to Chicago. This was the understatement of the century, but I wasn't about to air our family's dirty laundry in front of a room full of church ladies. Zach was still standing there, looking like he wanted to bolt for the door. Jenna, he said finally, you look really good. Happy. I am happy, I said. Very happy. That's great, I'm glad. But he didn't look glad. He looked miserable. How's the startup life treating you? I asked because I couldn't resist. Zach's laugh was bitter. Oh, ups and downs, mostly downs lately. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I almost meant it. Almost. Actually, Nathan said, and there was something in his tone that made everyone look at him. We should probably talk about your transition into the new role. There are going to be some changes to the company structure. In business speak, that usually meant layoffs. Of course, Zach said quickly. Whatever you need. I'm grateful for the opportunity to. We'll discuss it Monday, Nathan said firmly. This isn't the time or place. But it kind of was the perfect time and place, at least from my perspective. Here was Zach, the man who had left me for my sister, now having to grovel to my husband for his job. Claire seemed to realize that the conversation had taken a turn she didn't understand or control. Well, she said, her voice artificially bright. This is all very interesting, but I should probably go mingle with the other guests. Mom would have wanted me to play hostess. She started to walk away, then turned back. Jenna, we should catch up later. There's so much we need to talk about. I'm sure there is, I said. After she left, the three of us stood there in awkward silence for a moment. I should go, Zach said finally. It was good to see you, Jenna. You seem really happy. I am, I said again. Take care of yourself, Zach. He nodded and walked away. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Nathan and I watched him go, then looked at each other. Well, Nathan said quietly, that was illuminating. You could say that. Are you okay? I thought about it for a moment. Was I okay? I'd just come face to face with the two people who had destroyed my life 10 years ago. I'd watched them realize that I wasn't the broken, lonely woman they'd expected to find. I'd seen the power dynamic completely reversed with my husband, now holding Zach's livelihood in his hands. And I felt nothing. No anger, no vindication, no desire for revenge. Just a kind of detached satisfaction, like watching a movie where justice finally gets served. I'm more than okay, I said. I'm free. Nathan smiled and kissed my forehead. Good, because I think your sister is about to come back over here and she looks like she has questions. He was right. Claire was making her way back across the room and her expression had shifted from shock to something more calculating. Jenna, she said when she reached us. Could I talk to you alone for a minute? I looked at Nathan, who nodded. I'll be right over there, he said, pointing to the dessert table. Take your time. Claire waited until he was out of earshot, then leaned in close. Okay, she said. What the hell is going on? I'm not sure what you mean. Don't play dumb with me. You show up here with Nathan Reeve, Jenna, and you expect me to believe it's just a coincidence? What would be coincidental about it? Claire's eyes narrowed. His company just bought Zach's company, which means he's Zach's boss, which means what? Which means you planned this somehow. You found out about Zach's company, you seduced his new boss, and you married him to get revenge on us. I stared at her for a moment, genuinely shocked by the accusation. Claire, I said slowly, do you really think I'm that manipulative, that calculating? I don't know, she said. You disappeared for 10 years. For all I know, you've been plotting this whole time. I almost laughed. You think I orchestrated meeting Nathan just to get back at you. Didn't you? No, I said firmly. I met Nathan through work. I fell in love with him because he's kind and smart and treats me like I matter. I married him because I wanted to spend my life with him. Your relationship with Zach never even crossed my mind. It was the truth, but I could see that Claire didn't believe me. So, it's just a coincidence, she said skeptically. It's life, I said. Sometimes things work out in ways you don't expect. Claire was quiet for a moment, chewing on her lower lip the way she used to do when we were kids, and she was trying to figure out how to get out of trouble. Jenna, she said finally, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay, is Nathan going to fire Zach? And there it was, the real reason for this conversation. Not concern for me, not curiosity about my marriage, but worry about how this situation might affect her. I don't know, I said. Nathan doesn't discuss personnel decisions with me. But you could talk to him. You could put in a good word for Zach. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. She was still beautiful, still polished, still trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. But for the first time, she was asking me for something instead of just taking it. Why would I do that? I asked. Because he's family, she said desperately. Because we're family. Are we? I asked. Because 10 years ago, when I needed my family to support me, where were you? Claire's face flushed. That was different. That was complicated. It wasn't complicated, I said. You chose him over me. You chose winning over loyalty. You chose yourself over your sister. I was young, she said. I made mistakes. You did, I agreed, and now you have to live with the consequences. I could see tears forming in her eyes, but I felt no urge to comfort her, not after everything she'd put me through. Please, she whispered. I'm asking you to help me. The way you helped me? She was quiet for a long moment. I know I hurt you, she said finally. I know I was selfish and cruel. But Jenna, if Nathan fires Zach, we're going to lose everything. The house, the cars, everything. We're already behind on our mortgage, and if he loses this job... She trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. Their perfect life wasn't so perfect after all. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, but it's not my problem to solve. Please, she said again. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm begging you. I looked across the room at Nathan, who was talking politely with some of my mother's friends. He was being charming and gracious, representing me well, even in this difficult situation. He was a good man, a fair man. If Zach was a valuable employee, Nathan would keep him. If he wasn't well, that wasn't my fault or my responsibility. I won't interfere with Nathan's business decisions, I said finally. Whatever happens to Zach, it'll be based on his performance, not on our history. That's all I can ask for, Claire said, but she looked relieved. Is it? I asked. Because 10 years ago, you didn't seem to think I deserved even that much consideration. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then so softly I almost didn't hear her. She said, I'm sorry for all of it. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am sorry. It was the first time she'd ever apologized to me. The first time she'd ever acknowledged that what she'd done was wrong. Thank you, I said. That means something. Does it mean enough for you to forgive me? I thought about it carefully. Did I forgive her? Could I forgive her? I don't know, I said honestly. But I don't hate you anymore. That's a start. Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face now. I never stopped missing you, she said. Even after everything, I never stopped wishing things could go back to the way they were. They can't, I said gently. Too much has happened. We're different people now. I know, she said. But maybe we could try to be sisters again. Someday. Maybe, I said. But it would have to be different this time. It would have to be equal. I understand. Nathan appeared at my side, sensing that the conversation was coming to an end. Everything okay over here? He asked. Yes, I said. We were just saying goodbye. Claire wiped her eyes and tried to pull herself together. Nathan, she said, It was nice to meet you. I hope, I hope you'll both be very happy. Thank you, Nathan said graciously. I'm sorry for your loss. After Claire walked away, Nathan and I stood there for a moment watching her rejoin the crowd of mourners. How do you feel? Nathan asked. Tired, I said. But also lighter somehow, like I've been carrying around this weight for 10 years and I finally got to put it down. Are you ready to go? More than ready. We said our goodbyes to the few relatives I actually remembered, made polite conversation with some of my mother's friends, and then escaped to our rental car. So, Nathan said as we drove back to the hotel, that was your family. That was my family, I confirmed. What did you think? I think, Nathan said carefully, that you made the right choice 10 years ago. Even knowing what you know now about Zach working for you. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Especially knowing what I know now, Zach is a mediocre employee at best, and from what I observed today, he's not much better as a husband. You dodged a bullet. And Claire is beautiful and charming and completely self-centered. She reminds me of a lot of people I've met in business. People who are used to getting what they want through manipulation rather than merit. She apologized, I said. For the first time ever, she actually apologized. How did that feel? Strange, I said. Good but strange, like hearing a foreign language that you used to speak fluently. That night, as we lay in bed in our anonymous hotel room, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. For 10 years, I'd carried around this anger, this hurt, this sense of unfinished business. But seeing Claire and Zach again, seeing how their lives had turned out, I realized that I'd already won. Not because they were struggling financially, or because Nathan happened to be Zach's boss, or because I'd married well while Claire's perfect relationship had turned out to be not so perfect. I'd won because I'd chosen to build a life based on authenticity rather than competition. I'd won because I'd found a partner who valued me for who I was not what I could give him. I'd won because I'd learned to say no to people who didn't treat me well, even when those people were family. Are you glad we came? Nathan asked. Yes, I said, surprising myself. I'm glad we came. I needed to see it through. And now we go home, I said, back to our real life. The next morning, we flew back to Chicago. As the plane lifted off from Grand Rapids, I looked down at the landscape below and felt nothing but peace. I was done with that chapter of my life. Done with carrying old wounds. Done with wondering what might have been done with letting my past define my present. I had Nathan. I had my business. I had a life that I'd built deliberately and thoughtfully. I had friends who chose to be in my life work that fulfilled me, and a marriage based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Claire could keep Zach, keep her beautiful house, keep her designer clothes and her perfect image. I didn't want any of it anymore. I had something better. I had myself back. And for the first time in my life, that felt like more than enough. I thought that was it. I thought our conversation at the funeral was the end of the story, the final chapter, in a book I'd been trying to close for 10 years. Nathan and I were planning to drive to the airport the next morning, fly back to Chicago, and resume our perfectly ordered life. But Claire had other plans. She showed up at our hotel that evening, just as Nathan and I were finishing dinner at the restaurant downstairs. The hostess approached our table looking flustered. "Excuse me," she said quietly, "but there's a woman at the front desk asking for you. She says she's your sister and that it's urgent." Nathan and I exchanged glances. "Did she give her name?" I asked. "Claire, she seemed upset." I sighed. "Tell her we'll be right there." Claire was standing in the hotel lobby and she looked nothing like the polished woman I'd seen at the funeral that afternoon. Her makeup was smeared, her perfect hair was disheveled, and she was wearing jeans and an old sweater instead of designer clothes. "Jenna," she said when she saw me, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to talk to you. Please." There was something desperate in her voice that I'd never heard before. Not manipulative, desperate, not calculated desperate, just raw, honest desperation. Okay, I said. Do you want to sit down? Not here, she said, glancing around the lobby. Somewhere private. Could we could we go up to your room? Nathan started to object, but I put my hand on his arm. It's okay, I said. Claire, this is going to be a short conversation, right? Right, she said quickly. I need to tell you something I should have told you years ago. The three of us rode up to the eighth floor in silence. Nathan used his keycard to let us into our room, then immediately busied himself with organizing our luggage, giving us space, but staying close enough to intervene if needed. Claire sat down on the edge of the bed and put her head in her hands. I don't even know where to start, she said. Start wherever you need to, I said, settling into the chair by the window. Claire was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with tears. You were right, she said, at the funeral when you said I just wanted to win. You were completely right. I waited for her to continue. I didn't love Zach, she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. I never loved him. I wanted him because he was yours. Because he chose you, and I couldn't stand that there was something you had that I couldn't have. This wasn't news to me, but hearing her say it out loud was still shocking. So I seduced him, she continued. I flirted with him every chance I got. I made myself available. I listened to his problems. I made him feel like he was the most interesting person in the world. And when he finally kissed me, I felt victorious, like I'd won some kind of prize. Claire, no, let me finish. I need to say this. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The night you found us together when you threw the ring and walked out, I should have felt guilty. I should have felt ashamed. But I didn't. I felt like I'd finally proven that I was better than you, that I could take anything I wanted, even your fiancé. I felt Nathan's presence behind me, solid and reassuring. But I was wrong, Claire said. So completely horribly wrong, because what I won wasn't a prize. It was a punishment. What do you mean? Claire laughed, but it was a bitter, hollow sound. Zach is a mess, Jenna. He's always been a mess, but I was too blinded by my need to beat you to see it. She stood up and started pacing around the small hotel room. His business has been failing for years, she said. He's made one bad decision after another, but he refuses to take responsibility for any of it. And when things get stressful, he gambles. Gambles. Crypto mostly. Bitcoin, Ethereum. All these altcoins that he's convinced are going to make him rich. He's lost tens of thousands of dollars that we didn't have. Money we needed for the mortgage, for basic expenses. My stomach clenched. How much debt are you in? A lot, she said quietly. More than you can imagine. We're probably going to lose the house. I might have to declare bankruptcy. I was stunned. At the funeral, Claire had looked so put together, so successful. But apparently it was all a facade. There's more, she said, and her voice cracked. He cheats, constantly, with women he meets online, with coworkers, with random strangers at bars. He's not even subtle about it anymore. Oh my God, Claire! I found out about the first affair 2 years after we got married, she said. He swore it was a mistake, that it would never happen again. And I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because admitting that my marriage was falling apart would have meant admitting that I destroyed your life for nothing. She collapsed back onto the bed, sobbing now. I've been lying to everyone for years, she said through her tears. Pretending everything was perfect, pretending I was happy, pretending that stealing your fiancé was the best thing that ever happened to me. I sat there watching my sister fall apart, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no desire to say, I told you so. Just a kind of hollow sadness for the woman who had spent her entire life competing in a game that no one else was playing. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Claire looked up at me, her mascara streaked down her cheeks. Because I saw you today. I saw how happy you are, how confident, how Free. And I realized that you've been living a real life while I've been living a lie. She wiped her nose with a tissue from the nightstand. And because I wanted you to know that you didn't lose anything when you lost Zach, you dodged a bullet, the biggest bullet of your life. I was quiet for a moment, processing everything she'd told me. I'm sorry, I said finally. I'm sorry you've been going through all of this. Don't, Claire said quickly. Don't feel sorry for me. I made my choices. I have to live with them. That doesn't mean I can't empathize with your pain. Claire stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. How can you be kind to me after everything I did to you? Because holding on to anger was poisoning me, I said. And because you're still my sister even after everything. I don't deserve your kindness. Maybe not, I said, but I'm not being kind for you. I'm being kind for me. Claire was quiet for a long moment. I know this is a lot to ask, she said finally, but is there any way you could talk to Nathan about Zach's job? I know he's not a great employee, but if he gets fired now, I don't know what we'll do. I looked over at Nathan, who had been listening to this entire conversation in silence. That's not my decision to make, I said. Nathan runs his company based on business principles, not personal relationships. I understand, Claire said, but I could see the desperation in her eyes. After Claire left, Nathan and I sat in our hotel room in stunned silence. Well, Nathan said finally, that was intense. That's one word for it. How are you feeling? I thought about it carefully. Sad, I said, and grateful, and a little bit relieved. Relieved? For years I've wondered if I made a mistake by walking away. If maybe I should have fought for Zach or tried to work things out with my family, but hearing all of that, I know I made the right choice. Nathan sat down next to me on the bed. What Claire did to you was terrible, he said. But I have to admit, I'm grateful for it. Why? Because if she hadn't stolen Zach, you never would have moved to Chicago. We never would have met. I never would have fallen in love with the most amazing woman I've ever known. I leaned against his shoulder. Do you really think it's that simple? That everything happens for a reason? I don't know, Nathan said. But I think sometimes the worst things that happen to us end up leading to the best things. The next morning, as we were packing our bags to leave, I made a decision. I pulled out my phone and sent Claire a text message. I can't interfere with Nathan's business decisions, but I know someone who might be able to help you with your financial situation. Her name is Sarah Martinez, and she's a financial advisor who specializes in debt consolidation and bankruptcy alternatives. Her number is 550123. She's helped a lot of people get back on their feet. Good luck. I wasn't doing it because I owed Claire anything. I wasn't doing it to assuage guilt or to prove that I was the bigger person. I was doing it because I could, and because helping someone in need felt better than holding on to resentment. Claire texted back an hour later, "Thank you. I don't deserve this, but thank you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The flight back to Chicago was peaceful. Nathan read a book while I stared out the window, watching the landscape change from the flat farmland of Michigan to the urban sprawl of Illinois. "Penny for your thoughts," Nathan said as we began our descent into O'Hare. "I was just thinking about something," Claire said. I replied, "about how she's been living a lie while I've been living a real life." "What about it?" "I think that's been the difference between us all along. She's always been so focused on appearances, on winning, on proving that she's better than everyone else. But I've been focused on actually building something meaningful. And that's why you're happy and she's miserable. Maybe. Or maybe she's miserable because she never learned to be content with what she had. She always needed more. Always needed to take what belonged to someone else." That evening, Nathan and I sat on the roof deck of our building, looking out over the Chicago skyline. The city lights twinkled below us, and I could hear the distant sound of traffic and music from the bars and restaurants in our neighborhood. "Do you think we'll ever see them again?" Nathan asked. "Claire and Zach." "I don't know," I said. "Maybe, But if we do, it'll be different. I'm different. How so? I thought about how to articulate what I was feeling. For so long, I defined myself in relation to them, I said. I was the sister who got betrayed, the woman who lost her fiancé, the victim of their selfishness. But that's not who I am anymore. Who are you now? I'm a woman who built a successful business from nothing. I'm a wife who chose love over fear. I'm someone who learned that the best revenge is living well. Nathan smiled and pulled me closer. I like that version of you. Me too. We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city settle into evening. Can I tell you something? I said eventually. Always. Standing there at my mother's funeral, seeing Claire and Zach again, realizing that your company had bought his, it felt like some kind of cosmic joke. Like the universe was playing this elaborate prank on all of us. But now I think maybe it wasn't a joke. Maybe it was justice. Not the cruel, vindictive kind of justice, but the kind that comes from natural consequences. Claire and Zach made selfish choices, and those choices led them to where they are now. I made brave choices, and those choices led me to you. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Do you think they'll be okay? Claire and Zach. I hope so. I said, and I meant it. I hope they figure out how to be honest with each other, how to build something real instead of just competing for prizes that don't actually matter. And if they don't, then that's their choice to make. I can't save them from themselves. As we prepared to go back inside, I took one last look at the city spread out below us. You know what the funny thing is, I said. What? 10 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought losing Zach was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. But it turned out to be the best thing. How so? I smiled, thinking about all the ways my life had exceeded my wildest dreams. Sometimes, the life you build from ashes turns out better than the one you dreamed, I said. Sometimes getting your heart broken is just the universe's way of making room for something bigger, something truer, something more beautiful than you ever imagined possible. Nathan kissed the top of my head. I love you, Jenna Reeve. I love you too, I said, and I love the life we've built together. As we walked back into our home, our real home filled with memories we'd created together and dreams we were still building, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. The girl who had spent her childhood competing for love was gone. The young woman who had been devastated by betrayal was healed. In their place was someone stronger, wiser, more compassionate, someone who had learned that you don't have to win every battle to win the war. Someone who understood that the greatest victory is not defeating your enemies, but transcending the need to have enemies at all. Someone who had discovered that the best way to honor your pain is not to inflict it on others, but to use it as fertilizer for something beautiful. I turned off the lights and followed Nathan to our bedroom, where we would sleep peacefully in the home we had chosen, surrounded by the life we had built with intention and love. And in the morning, we would wake up and continue the work of being happy. Not because it was easy, but because we had learned that happiness is not something you stumble into. It's something you create one brave choice at a time. The end. Sometimes, the best revenge is just living your best life and letting karma handle the rest. What do you think? Did Claire and Zach get what they deserved, or should Jenna have done more? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of family drama and unexpected justice, hit that subscribe button for more real-life tales that prove truth really is stranger than fiction. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.